Hello, and welcome to the Short Story Workshop. I'm Mel, I'm here with Matt and Simone. This week's story is The Doom That Came to Sarnath by H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know if I've said that properly.
I was saying Sarnath,
Sarnath.
which sounds more normal.
That does make more sense actually. Sarnath. Okay.
Although I do quite like the pronunciation of Sarnath.
I'm just gonna call it Sani, like a sandwich.
Okay.
Sure.
Anyway, Matt, please go ahead.
Right, so this is one of Lovecraft's earlier stories, one of his short ones. I think the reading is like 15 minutes, but it's one of my personal favourites because it never fails to pique my curiosity. And also I can't wait to see what both of you, but particularly Simone, think of this one, having completely hated the last time we did Lovecraft. So that'll be fun.
It's a skeptical noise there from Simone in case any of you missed it. Alright, here is The Doom That Came to Sarnath by H.P. Lovecraft.
There is in the land of Nar a vast still lake that is fed by no stream and out of which no stream flows. 10,000 years ago there stood by its shore the mighty city of Sarnath, but Sarnath stands there no more. It is told that in the immemorial years when the world was young, before ever the men of Sarnath came to the land of Nar, another city stood beside the lake, the grey stone city of Ib, which was old as the lake itself, and peopled with beings not pleasing to behold. Very odd and ugly were these beings, as indeed are most beings of a world yet inchoate and rudely fashioned. It is written on the brick cylinders of Cadapharon that the beings of Ib were in hue as green as the lake and the mists that rise above it, that they had bulging eyes, pouting, flabby lips, and curious ears, and were without voice. It is also written that they descended one night from the moon in a mist, they and the vast still lake and grey stone city Ib. However this may be, it is certain that they worshipped a sea-green stone idol chiselled in the likeness of Bokrug, the great water lizard, before which they danced horribly when the moon was gibbous. And it is written in the papyrus of Larnac that they one day discovered fire, and thereafter kindled flames on many ceremonial occasions. But not much is written of these beings, because they lived in very ancient times, and man is young, and knows little of the very ancient living things. After many eons, men came to the land of Nar, dark shepherd folk with their fleecy flocks, who built Thra, Larnac, and Cadapharon on the winding river Eye. And certain tribes, more hardy than the rest, pushed on to the border of the lake and built Sarnath at a spot where precious metals were found in the earth. Not far from the grey city of Ib did the wandering tribes lay the first stones of Sarnath, and at the beings of Ib they marvelled greatly. But with their marvelling was mixed hate, for they thought it not meet that beings of such aspect should walk about the world of men at dusk. Nor did they like the strange sculptures upon the grey monoliths of Ib, for those sculptures were terrible with great antiquity. Why the beings and sculptures lingered so late in the world, even until the coming of men, none can tell, unless it was because the land of Nar is very still and remote from most other lands both of waking and of dream. As the men of Sarnath beheld more of the beings of Ib, their hate grew, and it was not less because they found the beings weak and soft as jelly to the touch of stones and spears and arrows. So one day the young warriors, the slingers and the spearmen and the bowmen, marched against Ib and slew all the inhabitants thereof, pushing the queer bodies into the lake with long spears because they did not wish to touch them. And because they did not like the grey sculptured monoliths of Ib, they cast these also into the lake, wondering from the greatness of the labour however the stones were brought from afar, as they must have been, since there is naught like them in all the land of Nar or in the lands adjacent. Thus of the very ancient city of Ib was nothing spared save the sea-green stone idol chiselled in the likeness of Bokrug, the water lizard. This the young warriors took back with them to Sarnath as a symbol of conquest over the old gods and beings of Ib, and a sign of leadership in Manar. But on the night after it was set up in the temple a terrible thing must have happened, for weird lights were seen over the lake, and in the morning the people found the idol gone, and the high priest Taranish lying dead as from some fear unspeakable. And before he died, Taranish had scrawled upon the altar of chrysolite with coarse shaky strokes the sign of doom. After Taranish there were many high priests in Sarnath, but never was the sea-green stone idol found. And many centuries came and went, wherein Sarnath prospered exceedingly, so that only priests and old women remembered what Taranish had scrawled upon the altar of chrysolite. Betwixt Sarnath and the city of Larnac arose a caravan route, and the precious metals from the earth were exchanged for other metals and rare cloths and jewels and books and tools, for artificers and all things of luxury that are known to the people who dwell along the winding river Eye and beyond. So Sarnath waxed mighty and learned and beautiful, and sent forth conquering armies to subdue the neighbouring cities, and in time there sate upon a throne in Sarnath the kings of all the land of Nar and of many lands adjacent. The wonder of the world and the pride of all mankind was Sarnath the Magnificent. Of polished desert quarried marble were its walls, in height 300 cubits and in breadth 75, so that chariots might pass each other as men drave them along the top. For full 500 stadia did they run, being open only on the side toward the lake, where a green stone sea wall kept back the waves that rose oddly once a year at the festival of the destroying of Ib. In Sarnath were 50 streets from the lake to the gates of the caravans, and 50 more intersecting them. With onyx were they paved, save those whereon the horses and camels and elephants trod, which were paved with granite. And the gates of Sarnath were as many as the landward ends of the streets, each of bronze, and flanked by the figures of lions and elephants, carven from some stone no longer known among men. The houses of Sarnath were of glazed brick and chalcedony, each having its walled garden and crystal lakelet. With strange art were they builded, for no other city had houses like them, and travellers from Thrar and Larnac and Kandapharon marvelled at the shining domes wherewith they were surmounted. But more marvellous still were the palaces and the temples, and the gardens made by Zokka the olden king. There were many palaces, the least of which were mightier than any in Thrar or Larnac or Kandapharon. So high were they that one within might sometimes fancy himself beneath only the sky. Yet when lighted with torches dipped in the oil of Dopha, their walls shewed vast paintings of kings and armies, of a splendour at once inspiring and stupefying to the beholder. Many were the pillars of the palaces, all of tinted marble, and carven into designs of surpassing beauty. And in most of the palaces the floors were mosaics of beryl and lapis lazuli and sardonyx and carbuncle and other choice materials, so disposed that the beholder might fancy himself walking over beds of the rarest flowers. And there were likewise fountains, which cast scented water about in pleasing jets, arranged with cunning art. Outshining all others was the palace of the kings of Nar and of the lands adjacent. On a pair of golden crouching lions rested the throne, many steps above the gleaming floor, and it was wrought of one piece of ivory, though no man lives who knows when so vast a piece could have come. In that palace there are also many galleries, and many amphitheatres where lions and men and elephants battled at the pleasure of the kings. Sometimes the amphitheatres were flooded with water conveyed from the lake in mighty aqueducts, and then were enacted stirring sea fights, or combats betwixt swimmers and deadly marine things. Lofty and amazing were the 17 tower-like temples of Sarnath, fashioned of a bright multicoloured stone not known elsewhere. A full 1,000 cubits high stood the greatest among them, wherein the high priest dwelt with a magnificence scarce less than that of the kings. On the ground were halls as vast and splendid as those of the palaces, where gathering throngs in worship of Zokala and Tamash and Lobon, the chief gods of Sarnath, whose incense enveloped shrines were as the thrones of monarchs. Not like the icons of other gods were those of Zokala and Tamash and Lobon, for so close to life were they that one might swear the graceful bearded gods themselves sate on the ivory thrones. And up unending steps of shining zircon was the tower chamber, where from the high priest looked out over the city and the plains and the lake by day, and at the cryptic moon and significant stars and planets and their reflections in the lake by night. Here was done the very secret and ancient rite in detestation of Bokrug, the water lizard, and here rested the altar of chrysolite, which bore the doom scroll of Taran Ish. Wonderful likewise were the gardens made by Zokka the olden king. In the centre of Sarnath they lay, covering a great space and encircled by a high wall, and they were surmounted by a mighty dome of glass, through which shone the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was clear, and from which were hung fulgent images of the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was not clear. In summer the gardens were cooled with fresh odorous breezes, skillfully wafted by fans, and in winter they were heated with concealed fires, so that in those gardens it was always spring. There ran little streams over bright pebbles, dividing meads of green and gardens of many hues, and spanned by a multitude of bridges. Many were the waterfalls in their courses, and many were the lilied lakelets into which they expanded. Over the streams and lakelets rode white swans, whilst the music of rare birds chimed in with the melody of the waters. In ordered terraces rose the green banks, adorned here and there with boughs of vines and sweet blossoms, and seats and benches of marble and porphyry. And there were many small shrines and temples where one might rest or pray to small gods. Each year there was celebrated in Sarnath the feast of the destroying of Ib, at which time wine, song, dancing and merriment of every kind abounded. Great honours were then paid to the shades of those who had annihilated the odd ancient beings, and the memory of those beings and of their elder gods was derided by dancers and lutanists crowned with roses from the gardens of Zocca. And the kings would look out over the lake and curse the bones of the dead that lay beneath it. At first the high priests liked not these festivals, for there were descended among them queer tales of how the sea-green icon had vanished, and how Taranish had died from fear and left a warning. And they said that from their high tower they sometimes saw lights beneath the waters of the lake. But as many years passed without calamity, even the priests laughed and cursed and joined in the orgies of the feasters. Indeed, had they not themselves, in their high tower, often performed the very ancient and secret rite in detestation of Bokrug, the water lizard? And 1,000 years of riches and delight passed over Sarnath, wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Gorgeous beyond thought was the feast of the 1,000th year of the destroying of Ib. For a decade had it been talked of in the land of Nar, and as it drew nigh there came to Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants, men from Thra, Larnek and Cadapharon, and all the cities of Nar and the lands beyond. Before the marble walls on the appointed night were pitched the pavilions of princes and the tents of travellers, and all the shore resounded with the song of happy revellers. Within his banquet hall reclined Nargis Hay, the king, drunken with ancient wine from the vaults of conquered Panath, and surrounded by feasting nobles and hurrying slaves. There were eaten many strange delicacies at that feast, peacocks from the isles of Nariel and the Middle Ocean, young goats from the distant hills of Implan, heels of camels from the Narzik desert, nuts and spices from Sadafrian groves, and pearls from wave-washed Tal dissolved in the vinegar of Thra. Of sauces there were an untold number, prepared by the subtlest cooks in all Nar, and suited to the palate of every feaster. But most prized of the viands were the great fishes from the lake, each of vast size, and served up on golden platters set with rubies and diamonds. Whilst the king and his nobles feasted within the palace, and viewed the crowning dish as it awaited them on golden platters, others feasted elsewhere. In the tower of the great temple the priests held revels, and in pavilions without the walls the princes of neighbouring lands made merry. And it was the high priest Nikar who first saw the shadows that descended from the gibbous moon into the lake, and the damnable green mists that arose from the lake to meet the moon and to shroud in a sinister haze the towers and the domes of fated Sarnath. Thereafter those in the towers and without the walls beheld strange lights on the water, and saw that the grey rock Akurion, which was wont to rear high above it near the shore, was almost submerged. And fear grew vaguely yet swiftly, so that the princes of Larnek and of Farukol took down and folded their tents and pavilions and departed for the river Ai, though they scarce knew the reason for their departing. Then, close to the hour of midnight, all the bronze gates of Sarnath burst open and emptied forth a frenzied throng that blackened the plain, so that all the visiting princes and travellers fled away in fright. For on the faces of this throng was writ of madness born of horror unendurable, and on their tongues were words so terrible that no hearer paused for proof. Men whose eyes were wild with fear shrieked aloud of the sight within the king's banquet hall, where through the windows were seen no longer the forms of Nargis Hay and his nobles and slaves, but a horde of indescribable green voiceless things with bulging eyes, pouting, flabby lips, and curious ears, things which danced horribly, bearing in their paws golden platters set with rubies and diamonds containing uncouth flames. And the princes and travellers, as they fled from the doomed city of Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants, looked again upon the mist-begetting lake, and saw the grey rock Akurion was quite submerged. Through all the land of Nar and the lands adjacent spread the tales of those who had fled from Sarnath, and caravans sought that accursed city and its precious metals no more. It was long ere any traveller went thither, and even then only the brave and adventurous young men of distant Felona dared make the journey. Adventurous young men of yellow hair and blue eyes who were no kin to the men of Nar. These men indeed went to the lake to view Sarnath, but though they found the vast still lake itself, and the grey rock Akurion which rears high above it near the shore, They beheld not the wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Where once had risen walls of 300 cubits and towers yet higher, now stretched only the marshy shore, and where once had dwelt 50 millions of men, now crawled only the detestable green water lizard. Not even the mines of precious metal remained, for doom had come to Sarnath. But half buried in the rushes was spied a curious green idol of stone, an exceedingly ancient idol, coated with seaweed and chiselled in the likeness of Bokrug, the great water lizard. That idol, enshrined in the high temple at Larnek, was subsequently worshipped beneath the gibbous moon throughout the land of Nar.
Should I go first with what I thought of this story?
Yeah.
I'll go first. Okay. What I thought of this story was, once again, I'm taken aback by the fact that there's no human protagonist. This is very different to the kind of stories where usually there's a main character and then the main character has a few friends and then they go on mad adventures. That kind of story. This is just entirely about a place, Sarnath. And I don't mind it actually. Like, it's a change. It's something a bit different. So mostly I was thinking about that when I read it. I spent the whole time waiting for the doom. I also like that doom was in capital letters. It wasn't just like doom, it was doom, you know?
Just to make sure that you know how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
I think I liked it better than the last one. It had some nice descriptions, and I was curious what form the Doom would take. And I think I can appreciate what Lovecraft was trying to do, but also, I don't get on with Lovecraft. I like stories with characters and dialogue and emotional stakes, and this just didn't have that, so I found it very hard to get too invested. So it kind of felt very distant from the story. Just it was a bit like reading a bit of old ancient history, and I like to engage my history by pretending I'm there rather than reading it like ancient history. That said, Sarnath or Sani or however we're pronouncing it deserved everything it got. It's my initial thoughts.
Fair.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Sarnath had it coming.
It really did. There were a lot of colonial undertones and I guess commentary around taking and killing what isn't yours.
I think especially what you don't understand as well.
Hmm.
Like, they even try and understand it? No, they were just like, you make us uncomfortable, so we're gonna kill you now.
Yeah, you haven't done anything to us and you're very easy to kill, but whatever, we hate you because you're different. I think that admitted initial crime grounded it a bit more than the last one and had me rooting for whatever revenge the id would take.
I think the tension was built well because you knew from the beginning that it was coming. They were gonna.
Pacing was off though, I think.
In what way?
In the sense that he spent so long on the description, but then he didn't describe the climax. It was just like his climax of a story, the doom that we spent the whole time waiting for, was written in a paragraph or something.
This is true. I think he spent too long on the setting description.
It would have worked if the climax was described in the same way, because his setting descriptions were really good. Like, they were beautiful, but he should have given the same imagery and visual kind of sweep to the destruction of Sarnath as well, because then that would have made the payoff for all of his description actually matter.
Yeah, if he could have gone back through it bit by bit, detailed the graphic destruction of all this beauty, that would have been really effective.
Yeah, the way it got twisted just a little bit wrong, for example. Like, currently the doom is just, oh, all the people left, okay.
I mean, they were chased out by a black gaseous being. It was quite dramatic.
Yeah, but we didn't really linger on that, did we?
Well, I guess not.
There was no one trying to protect their kid, sprinting for their life, unsure what's happening or what they've done to deserve this. No kind of thinking about this happened 1,000 years ago. Like, why are you punishing me for something that my ancestors did? It just doesn't engage with that level of the revenge aspect, which is what I find interesting. So
it's very high level, I suppose. It doesn't look at the individual, it looks at a group, a whole group. It does pick out some members, such as the priest and the king, but it doesn't focus in on them. They're not POV characters.
And you don't get the emotions of their reactions, which makes it difficult to feel like there's a... I mean, maybe not for everyone. For me, it makes it difficult to have a proper stake in it.
I think it is intended, as you said, and I'm glad you said this earlier, to kind of feel like you're reading history, right?
It's like a folk tale or a fairy tale. same kind of oral tradition.
Yeah, and you get the sense that all of this happened a very long time ago, and I think for that to hold, you can't be too specific because when stuff's retold, all the specifics tend to get ironed out, right?
Yeah, I appreciate what he's doing. I just don't personally connect with it. Like on a high level, I can engage and think, oh, that's what he's doing. On a personal enjoyment level, reading, I just have quiet grumblings in my head.
I would say the main character of the story is actually the place and not a person, which I find very interesting and is probably true of maybe some of other. Well, it was kind of true in Nyarlathotep because it was more about the destruction the creature wrought rather than the people. Do you think that using place in that way can be effective?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's difficult, but I think the best settings are always kind of built like a character.
Mm. You often see it in haunted houses. It's one example I can think of very distinctly.
Yeah, and you see it sometimes in fantasy. I like when settings have they almost have like their own motivation. They want things to be a certain way, and you can feel that, and it often ties into whatever the theme of the story is as well. And I think that stories that do this well end up having like this really strong atmosphere and kind of feeling to them that other stories perhaps lack.
Mm. I think it's effective as well for the fact that the story spans many centuries, so you kind of need it to be something more constant than a particular character for that particular style of story to work. Unless your main character is immortal, then or you're following one particular family through generations, you needed something like a city to stand as your main character instead.
Yeah.
Do you think we were supposed to get attached to Sarnath through the very decadent descriptions of it?
No, not necessarily, because they're still the bad guys, right?
I was gonna say it contrasts Sarnath with the doom to come, in that we're seeing these people living their lavish, decadent lives, and to see them living so lavishly, it heightens a sense of loss and ruin and doom to come. It's what the stake is, and that we know that it's going to destroy this place. It also isn't as impactful to have destroyed Sarnath if it was like a beginning civilization that hadn't reached its heights of being this jewel of a place. And finally, I think it highlights like the utter grossness, I guess, of the people who built it on the backs of like colonialism, slavery, and destroying this other civilization. It's beautiful things to hide something really ugly that they did, isn't it?
I wondered if there was something satisfying about seeing something so, you know, grand getting all torn down.
There's some poetic justice there, right?
Yeah, a bit like maybe kids who enjoy destroying others' sandcastles.
I think the story is about time. It's completely about time. So this is perhaps why we can't have any human protagonist because they wouldn't live long enough, right?
Mm.
The whole idea is, I think, of this story is that nothing survives forever, and things are happening on much larger timescales than any person can usually be involved with.
That makes sense.
Because places can stand for thousands of years, but people can't.
And God's Gantus Bokrog, or whatever his name is still there at the end.
Yeah, I think we tend to think about people as they have lives, they are born and die, and then we sometimes think about places as being kind of permanent. Like, think about London, you're like, yeah, London's always been there. And I think Lovecraft is kind of trying to challenge that idea.
Hmm.
I'm worried that Bugrug is gonna come destroy London now.
I think you mean Bokrug, the water lizard.
Bugrug the water lizard.
They has to specify every time that he's a water lizard, just in case you forgot.
He'll come out of the Thames.
Oh god. Just use the London Eye like a frisbee.
Exactly.
I quite like the idea that Bokrug is actually quite a meek and small in physical appearance, but is powerful in cosmic ways.
Yeah, here. I mean, he basically uses necromancy at the end, doesn't it? It's not like he's
Yeah.
Godzilla coming to tear the city down.
Oh, I totally imagined Godzilla, sorry. Okay, so I think we've mentioned a bit about the descriptions and what function they might perform. Did they evoke any particular feelings in either of you?
I mean, he's clearly aiming for wonder, which was a pretty big deal around the time the story was written. People were all about trying to have that sense of discovery. That's why there was lots of like Jules Verne stories. and Lord Dunsany, who was very much inspired by. It's kind of different to how we think about stories now. I think we don't tend to focus on description quite so much.
No, description to that level I think can become blocky and dumpy, and it slows the pace down a lot. While I think we expect our novels these days to be very fast paced to go with our fast paced lives.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, I agree with whoever said earlier that it has a soggy middle, this story.
Yeah, we all
That
agree on
nice
that.
description is just sort of sinking it.
But there's still things we can learn from it because those descriptions are really good. Some of them are just stick in your head, right?
Which ones do you like?
I like the part about the throne, which is carved from a single block of ivory. Like that, it just poses so many questions just by existing. And then you have the dome, which always shows the stars. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And all the different coloured stones.
Yeah, he really went in depth on the materials, which was pretty interesting.
It almost made it feel more scientific, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's the idea as well, isn't it, of what they trade and take from these places. Like, they took a lot from Id, didn't they, to build their city?
Yeah.
So it's like everything comes down to materials. The dead, bones of the dead at the end are transformed, and they are also just more raw materials to make a new civilization out of.
I think Lovecraft should have been a set designer if he was alive these days.
he really heavily valued atmosphere. He said so in his essays, and it shows a lot.
Yeah, I remember loving some of the descriptions from the last story we looked at as well, especially the ones I think of the moon. They were really pretty and poetic.
Yeah, he valued kind of trying to capture that kind of more of a feeling or an atmosphere more than any of the things we traditionally consider part of a story, which is why it seems so unique and strange to us.
Yeah, and it's strange to read.
Like modern writers value atmosphere, but we're also considering like 5,000 other things, right? You're like, we need good characters, we need good plot, and it's kind of strange to see someone not really bother about those things too much and just focus on atmosphere pretty much entirely.
Yeah, I do think we underplay setting a lot these days, but also I stand by that. I can drop setting, I can't drop plot and characters. But then it's a different style of writing, isn't it? Different preferences. Like you're very good, Matt, at leaning into setting, and you often start from a setting, don't you?
Yeah, I often do, and I find it harder to read stories that don't focus on setting now, or at least more than I used to, because if I can't picture where something is happening, it feels really important, right?
Yeah, it grounds the story, it gives it a place to exist, whereas, yeah, I guess if you don't know where it is, it's. But I don't know, sometimes a sketch is okay, but painting that full portrait in the background can be a really effective way to give so much to your scene, because it can add tension, it can add atmosphere, it can add wonder if you're doing fantasy settings.
And for the people like me who are terrible at setting, you can also have your characters engage with the setting as a way of writing setting if you're really, really bad at just sitting down and writing setting and world building.
Yeah.
Like, don't just have them have a conversation with each other, have them doing something in their setting.
Moving around the space.
Yeah. Not in the least because it allows you to do easy beats and stuff.
It's there to be interacted with. But I think there's so much scope in setting that we haven't really fully explored because, you think about people, like characters are pretty varied, but we tend to fall into archetypes a lot. I think with settings, there's so much more room that hasn't been explored. You can come up with all kinds of different things and different situations. And, the place that people are in defines the problems that they're going to be fixing. And then that kind of constrains the story in an interesting way because if you have a problem in a different setting, you might try and solve it differently, and then suddenly you have something that's really unique rather than just the most obvious thing that every other story does.
Yeah, plays are quite interesting to study for setting just because they always have such a limited setting that the place they pick is really important because it narrows the scope of the story. And same with the anthology at the moment, Inside Number 9, because it's always set in a really specific room. So whenever I watch that, I end up thinking about setting more, just because they always have to pick a setting that's got something to do with the number 9. And then that completely informs what story they can tell.
Yeah, so that's a great series. They do setting really well.
What are your favourite ways to describe or characterize a setting?
So there's a few different ways. you can either give your setting a motivation, which sounds strange, but you kind of define it the way you would a character. That's one
Like
way that
the
I've used
Overlook
before.
Hotel in The Shining.
Right. Like, or it's almost like the place is trying to be a certain way, and it changes people that enter, or
Again,
it's subtle,
any
but
kind
it's
of
there.
haunted house.
Yeah, that's one way. Other ways, I think you need to. Often, when people try and make fantasy settings, they get too carried away, right? They're like, oh, I want a setting where there's like loads of different planets or worlds, and they all have their own culture, and they all do things differently. And also, I'm going to have this magic system that works in this way, and it just becomes too much. I find a good way to build setting is just pick something reasonably normal and then change just one thing. And it can be something about the culture, something about the way gravity works, just anything, just one thing. And then that will affect everything else because settings are so complicated, right? If you change one thing in culture, that changes the entire history, it changes the science. So just changing one thing can then just expand out until you have suddenly a whole world built around just that idea.
I'm just going to say, for people who may not know, Matt is very good at doing this. He has written a novel where everybody lives on boats, so there's no ground. And he's also written a novel where everybody lives in trees, which is very good.
Thank you. But I just like thinking about these kinds of things where what would it be like? How would things be different?
Yeah, I do like in your trees one that the people just disappear off the trees.
Yeah, it was quite funny. My immediate thought after being like, what happened if we all lived in trees was, oh, suddenly murder is really easy.
You just push people off. When I'm writing settings, I tend to use either a concept or, so like right now I'm writing something about coral reefs, so I've basically done a lot of research into what coral reefs do and have taken that as the basis for my setting, or I use easily drawn settings that I know a lot about in real life, such as a beach, because I'm always on the beach, or a train, as you may know if you've listened to our cursed words episode. I like using common settings because you can use it to ground a story that's got fantastic, cool elements, or add interest in the background of the story and make it a little bit different. I'd say I'm somewhere halfway between Matt and Simone. I don't make setting my focus, but I try and include it like a little bit. So yeah, but I think it's a really powerful tool that
It is. I need to work on setting.
I think being halfway between Matt and Simone is generally a good place to be.
Probably. We're both very extreme examples.
See, Simone, your settings have got better, at least in the last story that I read. I liked the gallery as a setting. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, it's because for once I was thinking, oh crap, I have to show this to Matt. I need to think about setting. It's going to kill me.
But you see, by showing me Simone's writing, I am tending towards Simone, and then Simone's tending towards Matt. So eventually, we'll both be where we need to be.
Yeah.
This is good. This is why writing groups are good, folks.
They will rip you to shreds in the nicest possible way if you just focus too much on one thing.
But you'll get good, so. Okay, so going back to Sarnath, the ending hints there's a sort of cycle going on where Buckrug, the water lizard, is worshipped, then he's forgotten, he comes back, throws a temper tantrum, destroys a few things, people go, oh god, worship him again, then he's forgotten, then he might come back and destroy a few more things. At least that's kind of what I assumed from the ending. I guess first of all, do you agree with the way I've read it? And second of all, what do you think about it?
So this was news to me. Having read the story like several times over the last few years, I come back to it every so often. When you said, "Oh, it's the cycle," I was like, "Really?" And then I thought about it. I was like, it doesn't say it's not a cycle, and it kind of makes sense. So yeah, I thought this was a really interesting idea. Not sure.
Yeah, I don't know. It just kind of made sense to me that that might be what it was going for, especially because I felt like there was some element of religious fear in it as well. Like, if we forget to worship God, they might come destroy us all, maybe. So, and I also thought that tied in with the statue disappearing and then being found again, maybe, because they go back to worshipping the statue at the end. So, yeah, that's kind of what I thought, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So as you can see, I'm not used to there being saying. I zoned in on the character of Bokrug. He became my protagonist.
I mean, yeah, he kind of is.
I mean, if it is about a cycle of worship, it's interesting the part in the middle where they're talking about all of the festivities they'd have every year celebrating the destruction of Id. As well, that's obviously not a religious ceremony, it really is, in that it's a celebration and it's to do with the gods. And in a way, even if it's coming from a place of, I guess, fear and mockery, it is still a form of they are fixated on this god that's not theirs, which is kind of
Yeah,
worship in
Yeah,
itself. Yeah.
that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that before.
it is the priest who discovers that they are doomed
In all caps.
in all cap. I don't know how to get the all caps across using voice.
I mean, to be fair, if you were dying and you were a priest and you know that the world is screwed, you're not going to write doom in lowercase.
Also, I feel like lowercase just takes more effort. Did you do cursive at that point?
I mean, the letters are mostly the same, but the D is marginally harder in lowercase.
Yeah. Why do you think Bokrug waited 1,000 years then?
Well, I don't know. When I first read this story, I was very curious about this lights on the lake thing, and I was kind of fascinated by it. And I thought maybe it's aliens. And so the first time I read this story, I thought they're definitely aliens, and that's why it took them 1,000 years, because they had to go and get help from some faraway galaxy or something.
I could believe that it does lean a lot into the aliens mythology. Like even earlier on, there's the whole thing about the grey sculptured monoliths, which they cast in the lake, and they wondered what, from the greatness of the labour, however the stones were brought from afar, because they must have been, since there's naught like them in the land of Minar and the lands adjacent. And it's like, okay, they're even them are like basically, oh, it has to be aliens. But then it also reminds me of flip side of the rhetoric, often surrounds places like Easter Island and Stonehenge, where they're like, oh, it's got to be aliens. It's impossible that the people are skilled enough to have done this and moved the stones on their own. It was just, I don't know, interesting twist. But also, yeah, I totally thought aliens.
Oh, I just thought he got caught up in something, like a really long game of solitaire, something. I just thought that it was on his to-do list, but he hadn't got around to it yet.
He just got stuck in traffic.
Or they destroyed his last
Yeah.
city and he needed another fancy city, so he thought he might as well give the humans time to make the fancy city that's fitting for him, and then he can take it.
I mean, there's no fun. It's no fun destroying something that's not that awesome, is it?
Exactly. Why crush them while they're
You need the
tiny?
satisfaction.
Wait for them to
Yeah.
think they won.
The other Lovecrafty answer is that 1,000 years means nothing to Bokrug. He just doesn't even notice that he's done anything strange.
That does make sense. That would also be maybe like the Fire Emblem explanation where the dragons just randomly fall asleep for thousands of years at a time. And then they wake up and they're like, oh my god, all my friends are dead.
Yeah, it do be like that.
Okay, has anyone, I think that's the end of my questions. Has anybody got any further comments or questions on the doom that came to Sarnath?
So Lovecraft kind of founded the genre we call weird fiction, right? So I thought about some other weird fiction stories that predominantly focus on setting.
Okay.
So short stories. The Red Tower by Thomas Ligotti is very good, and similarly has no people in it, but like it emphasizes this to make it really eerie, because things are happening, but at no point do they mention any person doing anything. So it becomes really strange, and you're like, but where are the people? And you almost get the sense that the setting is acting by itself. That's The Red Tower. It's a great story. There's something longer, Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. There was also a film that was very good a couple of years ago. That's really cool because that focuses on this weird alien area that appears on Earth, and whenever people enter, most of them don't come back, and there's all kinds of weird stuff going on in there. That's very focused on setting as well, and it's very good.
I would like to watch that movie, actually. That does sound cool.
I would highly recommend it.
Okay, I will round off with just a handful of facts about the story, because why not? Although, if you would like to know more about Lovecraft, please check our previous Lovecraft episode. I think it was episode 2, where we had a Donald on who knows so much about Lovecraft, and we talked a lot about his life and work. So if you are interested, please go listen to that one. So this story in particular was published in The Scot in 1920, which was a magazine for amateur fiction. It's part of Lovecraft's dream cycle set of stories, which is called because they were inspired by Lord Dunsany, who Matt mentioned earlier. So Lovecraft really admired Lord Dunsany. He saw him on tour in the US and became like an Insta fan. Interestingly, I think Lord Dunsany was much more successful than Lovecraft was during his lifetime. But I'd never heard of him before, so...
Yeah, it's one of these funny things where he was way more popular at the time, but now it's inverted.
Yeah, I have no idea who he is. He was some famous author from America.
So you read all these letters from Lovecraft who's just kind of admiring this guy who's so famous, and you're like, who?
Would you rather be famous in your lifetime or famous after you're dead?
Ooh. Well, I mean, are you assuming that if you're famous in your lifetime, you stop being famous afterwards?
Yeah, you don't get both.
Right.
I think I'd rather be famous after I was dead, because if I'm dead, I won't care if people go through my Twitter history.
I don't know. I feel like after I'm dead, it doesn't really matter to me. I'd rather be famous while I'm alive, but not too famous. I'd rather be, really, I'd want somewhere in the middle.
You don't want to be papped.
You want to be the
Yeah,
Coldplay of authors. Everyone's heard your songs, but they can't say a single thing about you.
I actually watched that fan episode of Inside Number 9. Now I'm very, very put off of being at all famous in any way, because a crazy fan might blackmail me.
Yeah, you never know. We've read Misery by Stephen King.
Yeah.
You could just be filling up at the petrol station one day, and the next thing you know, you're in the back of some crazy lady's car with your broken leg.
God, Annie, she's such a good villain.
Still haven't read that novel. I want to.
Read it, it's so good.
Or watch the
I
film.
could not stop reading it. I read it in one sitting.
Nice.
I was awake till 4 a.m, yes.
That is a very promising recommendation then.
I don't know what it was about it, but it was one of those books that I just, when people say, oh, I just couldn't put the book down, I'll roll my eyes and go, okay, yeah, but you probably did put it down, didn't you? But with that book, I did not put it down.
It's gripping. You want to know what happens.
Yeah.
So many twists as well.
It really is the highest compliment you can give something, isn't it, that you can't put it down.
Yeah. You just have to know what happens. Okay. Unless anyone's got anything else, I think we'll finish there. Okay. Thank you for listening. You can find all our previous episodes and stories on shortstoryworkshop.com. If you'd like to contact us, you can do so on Twitter. I am at Ficaholic. Matt is
At Matt the Writer.
And Simone.
E_M_typewriter, also known as the modern typewriter.
Thank you for listening. Beware, Botgrug.
The water lizard.
Thank you and goodbye.